What did the pandemic ruin more than we realize? My sense of purpose or meaning. I haven't felt this nihilistic since I was a brooding teenage girl. 20 years later, and now it's actually more of an existential hell. This is in relation to actual virus, plus politics, plus societal response. People are just mean. Most people have careers and work at companies that if either disappear tomorrow, the only suffering would be from the employees without salaries anymore. I honestly don't think the majority of Americans especially truly understand just how fucked up the healthcare system is and is going to be. Not just staff burnout, but we have nationwide back orders on some really key medications, and even things like blood and albumin shortages. There have been times that we've literally just not had the supplies available to give a blood transfusion and have had to resort to alternative treatments for things like seizures, because we simply do not have the normal medications available. We have major equipment shortages too. There were several months that we couldn't constantly get Foley catheter kits and were having to Frankenstein things together. Currently, the only A-line kits my facility has are the double port ones that we use for swans. Bariatric beds? Good luck finding one. Entire supply chains and production lines have ground to a halt. Add staff burnout, staffing shortages, increased patient loads, deceased equipment, and it's just a domino tower. But most people, not a single fucking clue. This is a really good point. I work second shift, so I stay up pretty late. Pre-pandemic, I could go grocery shopping, run a few errands, grab some food somewhere at night, but almost everywhere closes down by 9 p.m. now. Even fast food joints are rarely 24 hours anymore. I'm in my 40s, but the pandemic really cut the list of friends I socialized with in half. We got out of the habit of seeing one another, and now that things are back to normal, we just made a habit out of not having dinner dates and stuff like that. When I realized this was happening, it made me look back and realize that I was the one who used to plan out things and reach out. I made the conscious decision to stop being the one who always reached out. Called and texted, and I now see that I'm only in touch with half the people that I used to be. Children's education, mental health, coping skills, and socialization. My wife is an elementary educator, and it's shocking how far kids regressed during the pandemic. By almost every measure, this generation of kids is in big trouble. I'm optimistic that the trend will right itself over time, but it's really sad to see. Food delivery. Fees on fees, and the menu prices are more expensive in the apps. Yes, it's a convenience and you are paying for it, but damn, it's expensive. Then you play the tipping roulette game. Leave a good tip and your order still might be late, wrong, missing times, etc. Want a tip after you get your food so you don't have to leave a tip beforehand? You ain't getting your food. Personally, I'm not as soft as I used to be, and I'm not as open with others either. I don't trust people the same way. I'm taken aback when someone other than my family wants to hug me because we just went so long without human communication. I was really lucky during the pandemic because me and my whole family stayed healthy. But there were lots of things put on hold that started to alter my path mentally and ultimately who I was as a person. I started seeing things I didn't like in people based on how they treated others in that really rough time. I saw the job that I thought was my dream job become very toxic. I feel like I was a lot more optimistic before the pandemic, and while I'm not pessimistic now, I am very cautious and wary in a way I was never before. In 2019, I had a nice sit-down dinner with my family at a comfy neighborhood Indian restaurant. It was very pleasant with the sound, soft conversation. This year we found ourselves back there. We were the only dine-in customers. The owner was trying his best to keep up the nice aesthetic, but constantly we heard the DoorDash alarm going off and a seemingly endless stream of cold, tired-looking men would shuffle in and ask if the DoorDash order was ready. The owner just looked so stressed trying to juggle this. There was no joy in any interaction. He was so overwhelmed and the drivers were overwhelmed. His one pleasant restaurant was now essentially the drive-thru at McDonald's. We just had to wonder, is contactless and effort-free driving just the new standard for all dining in the post-COVID world? For me, it was a sense of self. I can hardly recall the person I used to be before the pandemic. My social skills took a massive hit and I became an anxious, self-deprecating mess. My hobbies have dramatically changed and I sometimes struggle to remember what I liked before consuming a shit ton of pandemic media. Things are getting better. Finishing high school and getting a job helped improve my social skills and emotional well-being. But I'm never gonna get even a smidge back to whoever I was before everything suddenly stopped. Perception of age. I watched my grandma decline mentally over the pandemic until her death about a year back. I watch TV and everyone seems to have aged 10 years. My dad put on a bunch of weight in lockdown. Now he can't shift it and he's suddenly old because he can't tie his shoelaces. I see vids of myself from early 2020. I sometimes video myself playing guitar and singing because I'm trying to mark progress. There's a sparkle in my eye and a cheerness that just isn't there anymore. It's like we've been through a war. Being ripped the fuck off. I feel like everything is a ripoff now. My groceries, my rent, any car, any restaurant, fucking tolls I didn't pay for. Fees, 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 every fucking where. The want to round up for little Timmy bullshit. The prices have gone up because of staffing shortage bullshit. There's just catches everywhere. But now it's like the world is trying to actively wrap me up in a spiderweb of fine print, lies, and horseshit fees because I need to live my life. Hell, even my paycheck is a fucking ripoff. I never really thought about things like cost of living, the economy, etc. I'm saying this as someone who was 23 when COVID started. I live in ImDam, which has usually been a cheap place to live, but even the trashy town's houses are like 30+% more expensive than pre-pandemic. Also, a burger and fries is like $10, whereas it was like $8 pre-pandemic. A cart full of groceries, and I mean filled, was like $200 pre-pandemic. Now it's like you get 3 grocery bags worth of stuff, and it's about that much. Work-to-life balance for me. We all got so used to online calls like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, WebEx, etc. that these apps have become the central part of how companies function. My days are choked full of these calls from morning to night with very few gaps in between. This wasn't the case before the pandemic. The fact that anyone can reach you anytime on your phone nowadays is bad enough, but these apps being tied to your daily calendar makes them infinitely worse. School. I was a teacher for 13 years and planned to do it forever. Teaching was a source of meaning and purpose and a majority part of my identity. I loved what I did and was so proud of the relationships I built with students and the things my kids achieved. At the end of last school year, I resigned. I just can't do it anymore. Last year, I started off hopeful that even if things were tough, at least I'd be back in the same room as my students and that would be good. It was not good. Last school year broke me. Honestly, I can't even talk about it because it's still too raw. Yes, I'm in therapy and I take a nice combinations of psych meds. From staying in touch with friends, still teaching, things aren't really any better this year. I know other teachers who either have left the profession or are looking for a way out. I hope this is just sample bias, but that's not the sense I get from lurking around the internet. Education is so foundational to a functioning society that if we can't unbreak it, we are pretty hosed. I hope we can figure it out. My long-term effects have been related to emotional regulation. I used to be able to take on a ton of stress and just work through things. Now it's like I have no capacity for stress at all since COVID. As soon as an emotion hits me, I have to fully feel it and express it, or I break down or have panic attacks. I read some research saying COVID enters the brain and takes longer to be eradicated from this part of the body compared to the rest of the body. They said people were experiencing emotion symptoms peaking at 6 months after infection until 12 months. I'm at month 7, hoping this shit wraps up soon. Trust in people. I've had some serious health issues in my life and those experiences were traumatic for many reasons, but didn't really impact my day-to-day life after I had recovered from the worst of it. I didn't really think of myself as a vulnerable person, just a person with some residential health problems that I dealt with. I was pretty proud of my resilience, of how I didn't let those health issues get in the way and how I could hide them very well. Seeing family members, close friends, and trusted colleagues decide I was disposable in the face of inconvenience when COVID spread was absolutely more traumatic than nearly dying and having extended periods of incapacitating illness. Having people minimize COVID, turn up at my house when sick, repeated, "Oh, COVID only affects sickly people and that's just life, people die every day," etc. dramatically changed my life. I realized that a lot of people saw me as a less valuable person, who probably from a survival of the fittest perspective ought to not exist. They simultaneously judged my poor health, which was not caused by a bad lifestyle and couldn't be avoided, as somehow making me deserving of serious COVID effects, while also criticizing my mask wearing and not wanting to meet up with obviously sick people. I have to be very careful about who I physically see now, particularly since isolation requirements ended, and have more than once been lied to and put in situations they knew I wouldn't consent to because COVID's over, we all just need to move on. I don't think I can ever really trust people again. I feel completely alone in a way I never felt before. The ability of students to manage any sort of discomfort. I work in a high school and we offered a virtual learning option for the 2020-2021 school year. Every parent of a kid with social issues or mild anxiety seemed to exercise this option. Fast forward a year and the mild anxiety was now severe, and parents were lined up asking for 504 plans and special accommodations for their kids. The kids with social problems now couldn't even sit in a class with a kid or teacher they didn't like. Attendance issues were terrible and families let their children skip tons of school in the name of school anxiety. There were so many fights. Kids hiding out all over the school, avoiding classes. We are getting back to normal, but the social deficits are still very noticeable. Driving skills. I don't know if people are in a constant state of panic, or me first, fuck you, or there's just a rash of less experienced drivers on the roads now. But it seems like people's attention spans have decreased so much that they need to be heavily involved in social media or texting even while they're behind the wheel, which causes so much inattentiveness that in the 5 to 6 miles of the route I travel each day in New Jersey, I might see 3 or more accidents because some asshat had his eyes on his phone, not the road.